Welcome to the second session of Quakerism 101. Today we're going to be talking about the light within. And as is our custom, let's go around the group of participants and give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. And so we'll get to know everybody a little bit. I recognize most everybody, but that's not going to stop me. Howard, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself as a Quaker?
Yeah, I'm Howard. I started attending meeting in early 1999 here. That was my first experience with Quakerism, and I became a member in 2004. And I've just been trying to get more into it since I started.
Yeah, I'm Don Swartout. I first started attending meeting in 2005. I moved to Austin to marry my wife, Gina Simmons. Quickly, I was guided to becoming a member, and I did that in 2006. And I've been on and off in the ARE committee and worship ministry and Karen Council since then. Terry? I'm going to go across as you guys are laid out on my screen. So Terry,
I'm sorry, I've been a little distracted. Are we just introducing ourselves? Yep. Well, I was in jail with George Fox and we've been a Quaker ever since. And you laugh.
He's not telling you the truth.
and I have a single standard of truth. That'll do.
Okay. Larry?
Yeah, my first meeting was 57th Street, or I'm sorry, 57th Street meeting in Chicago in 1967. And I went because my second wife told me it was time to go to meeting. And while I was there, a woman stood up and for 15 minutes talked about her income tax. And then at the end of the meeting, during announcements, the clerk of House and Grounds asked that people attend the House and Grounds meeting that evening because they had poor attendance at the House and Grounds committee. So I thought, oh, this would be a good way to understand Quaker process. So I went to the meeting and they discussed for 3 hours whether or not to fix the front gate and never came to a consensus on that. Some 15 years later, while I was on business in Toronto, I stopped off in Chicago and went by the 57th Street meeting and noticed that they had removed the front gate, thereby solving the problem. My reaction was, these are my kind of people. And I have been with them ever since.
Okay, thank you, Larry. Jim?
Jim Kuhn. I've lived in Austin since 2016 and been coming to Friends Meeting of Austin since that summer, I think. I was raised in the Pittsburgh Friends Meeting by ex-Catholics, practiced Zen Buddhist meditation for a number of years. And then after our son was born, we were members of a synagogue, Reformed Jewish synagogue in Silver Spring, Maryland, where he was bar mitzvahed. So I'm glad to now be a member of the Austin Friends Meeting. This is sort of the first time that I've really become more in depth into Quakerism since my youth, and it feels a little bit like coming home. So,
Mary?
You're on mute, Mary.
Unmute, please, Mary.
Oh, that will be easier. I went to my first Quaker meeting in Hong Kong the Sunday after Tiananmen Square, which of course was a big event in Hong Kong as well. I've been coming ever since. I moved to Austin in '93 and found Friends Meeting of Austin.
Steve?
Yes, I'm Steve Duck. I've been a Quaker since, I don't know, 36 years now, originally at Swarthmore Friends Meeting near Philadelphia. And I've been a member of Friends Meeting of Austin for about 6 years and been on the Care and Council Committee and am now serving as clerk of meeting.
Chip?
I'm Chip Bach. I guess my upbringings were kind of, they're all over, but I was raised kind of agnostic, but yet sort of kind of Episcopal, and then in college a little bit more of a fundamental experience, Christian experience. And then there was a brief period of time, a little bit of New Age thinking, and then I joined the Presbyterian Church in Raleigh, North Carolina, when we lived there, and we attended several Friends meetings then, both the Friends meeting of Durham and the Friends meeting of Raleigh, and I do get back to Raleigh on occasion and always visit the Raleigh Friends meeting when I'm there, and that's about it. So you know, and I have submitted to Steve my request for membership to the Friends meeting of Austin. So I'm not a Quaker yet, but almost in sometime in the future here, hopefully.
Thank you. Sheila? Sheila? You, yes.
Sorry. This is my husband Luke, and I'm Shalisa Burcham. We started attending virtually back in March. What? March? Sure, March. It's last year's been a blur. We were independently interested in Quakerism at the same time. It was a weird coincidence. We both kind of brought it up like separately. It was a little odd. And yeah, we were both raised Christian, and then kind of went to agnostic for a while, and then said we'd like to look into something. So we had read a lot about a lot of different viewpoints of religions, and decided that from what we could tell, it seemed like this best fit our view on life. So we decided to check it out, and we're still here checking it out.
Glenna? Glenna? Your turn. Unmute.
Did you say my name?
So sorry.
Oh.
Okay. I've been a member of the meeting since 1982. So that's about 37 years. And as a member, I've only attended the meeting in Austin, and also, of course, South Central yearly meeting.
Yes.
I've clerked both meetings, South Central and Austin, several times for Austin. I used to give Quakerism 101 sessions, and I've got lots of information on Quakerism 101 that I'm going through. So I'm interested to hear how it's going now. And I may have some material to offer also from Robin Anderson, who sent me her Quakerism 101 notes. Anyway, I recently worked 18 years for Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, so I also am acquainted with Presbyterians. That's it.
Thank you. Paul?
Hello, I'm Paul Pierce. I moved to Austin from Denver about a little over 25 years ago, I think. And I've been a regular attender at the Austin meeting for, I think, a little over a decade now. And that's all I have to say at this time.
James?
Hey, my name is James Buller. I guess I was raised in a fairly non-religious to anti-religious kind of family, and I guess I started getting very curious about religion and in particular Christianity in high school, and became fairly intensely religious to the great dismay of my family. And this, I guess, ever since then, I've kind of been looking at different things, trying to figure this all out. And I first came to Friends Meeting of Boston probably around 2011, I think. And I'd read about it in a novel, and I was also involved a lot with Occupy, which was doing a lot of consensus, which is related to the Quaker process. Yeah, I've been here ever since. I became a member in, I believe it was 2016.
Hannah?
Hi. I first came to Friends Meeting of Austin sometime in the last few years. I'm not sure. I'd have to check my journal to know exactly when. I grew up in a Presbyterian community church. Yeah.
Liz?
Excuse me, friends, I'm getting lunch, but I grew up in a justice aimed Jewish family, and but I was bat mitzvahed because I was interested, but I quickly lost faith in the Jewish way of seeing things, and went through a long time of trying to find out what was well, a long time, my teenage years, and was lucky enough to find Quakerism through social action things, and but I really didn't. I mean, I was looking for a religious home too. So I've been a Quaker since 1970. I've been a member of the Religious Society. I think I've been a Quaker all my life. I think, you know, you don't have to have membership in a Quaker meeting to be a Quaker. I became a member in 1970, and have been traveled around for a variety of reasons, and been a staff member of a number of Quaker organizations, and most recently staff member of the among Quakers of the Religious Education and Publications Coordinator of Friends General Conference. So I bring a long history of Quaker thought and things like that. But I really I'm continually learning what it is to be a friend, and I love coming to these because that's part of my learning. So I don't think one is both a Quaker all the time, but also is continually having revelations about what that means.
And last but not least, Daniel.
Yeah, I'm good friends with Howard and Gelia. I've known Gelia for 30 odd years, and Howard a little less than that. But I've kind of started coming to meetings the last year or two, off and on, and grew up Southern Baptist, and never quite threw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to things spiritual or religious in nature. In fact, I'd say it's a big part of my life. That search for meaning, and so I've, gone from being Southern Baptist to Episcopalian, and falling in love with the smells and bells and the art and ritual and pomp and circumstance of all that. but then couldn't swallow the creeds, and then became a Unitarian Universalist for a while. Even sat, what I noticed Jim talking about, I sat with the Austin Zen Society here in Austin for a short time. I wish I could do that again, but it's too far afield as far as getting there every morning and then getting to work. But yeah, I'm kind of a pluralist when it comes to, I guess, religion and spirituality now. I'm very open and eager and curious about all things involved in religion, world religions and whatnot. But I'm drawn to the Quaker understanding and community because of the democratic nature of the meetings and the quiet aspect of meditating and sitting in silence. So, and I'm wanting to get the ball rolling and find out what it takes to become a Quaker and get more involved in the Austin Quaker meeting.
Great. So
I should actually come clean about myself. I was not in jail with Fox, I confess. I became acquainted with Friends in the late 60s, early 70s as a conscientious objector, and became a member of the Dallas Friends meeting in the 70s. Attended South Central Yearly meeting and occasionally Austin meeting during that period. And then I went off to Portland, Oregon, started work for the American Friends Service Committee and served the service committee there and in Greensboro, North Carolina, and later in Philadelphia, and ended up back here and joined Austin meeting. And in the meanwhile, I was involved in numerous national and international Quaker organizations, and that stuff there married the alpha Quakerists of the world, and that's my connection with Quakerism.
Thank you. Well, we've got quite a variety. Today, our topic is the light within. And I have to admit, when James asked me if I'd be willing to teach it or lead it, teach is the wrong word, I was a little bit unsure what that would look like. Fortunately, I came across a pamphlet, a Pendle Hill pamphlet by Rex Ambler, called The Light Within, Then and Now. And so I am also very interested in hearing other people talk about the light and what it means to them and what their experiences are. Because as I was preparing for today, I realized I had really had few opportunities to do that. And so I'm very curious about what other people have to say about the light and what it means to them. But before we get to that, Steve, could you put up the handout or the screening, please? Okay, what I've done here is summarize the pamphlet. And we're going to start off with that, and then we'll shift over to sharing about what the light means to each of us. So the title is, as I said, The Light Within, Then and Now. And it was written in, I think, 2007. So I'm just going to go over the introduction and say a few things, and then we'll shift to a brief history. All Quaker concepts revolved around this concept, which is remarkably vague, and I can't emphasize that enough. Margaret Post Abbott's definition is, the light is within, though from without. And if a person stands in the light, responds to Christ, and is obedient, the power will be given to the individual to end all his or her wrongdoing. Hambler suggests that this is a fair account of the variety of friends' understandings. However, the concept of the light does not come across as a coherent concept. He argues that over the course of our history, we've forgotten what the light refers to. The one thing in that definition that struck me is this notion that the light is within, though from without, which is, on the surface at least, paradoxical. And the reason it interested me so much is that when I first experienced the light, I experienced it definitely as from without. And for many, many years, when I prayed and meditated and tried to connect with the light, I always had the sense that it was coming from outside, and that it was a response. I was experiencing a response to that external light. It's only in the last 5 or 10 years that I've come to experience the light within as well. And so part of what I've experienced when preparing for this is I was never quite sure whether we were talking about just the light within or whether we were talking about the light in general. So there'll be a little bit of confusion, but we'll make the best of it. So any questions thus far? Or comments or responses? Feel free to unmute if you're going to respond.
I'm curious about others' experiences with this idea or this experience, I guess, of the light. And I mentioned today in meeting how I had I don't know how to put it into words, and I don't want to like go on and on and on about it, but I did have almost like a near-death type experience at one point in my life where it was very intense, and I've never had an experience before or since then that was so intense that probably, I guess, would be my experience of this light in a profound and deep and meaningful way. I mean, it's hard to even put into words what I experienced. I was bodiless. I didn't have a body, and I just pure energy and a feeling of bliss, in the sense that there was a feeling of, when I say bliss, a mixture, I had a mixture of joy and peace like I've never felt before in my life. And just almost like as if when you throw a pebble in a pond or a water, and the ripples go out in concentric circles, but I was that energy or those circles. And I remember thinking, I don't have a body. How can I not have, I can't feel hands and feet and whatnot, but I could feel this pulsating energy and this color, almost colors vibrating outward. And just like, it was an incredible experience. But I see that was like almost like a state specific experience, in that it was I dipped my toe into some otherworldly thing, and I haven't ever been able to replicate that again since then, and I don't know if I'd want to or need to, but anyway, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but that's something that I have experienced, and I've wondered if others have had such experiences.
So Steve, can you shift us to the general view?
Is that where you wanted to be, Don?
No, I want to see all the people.
Oh, I'm sorry. You wanted to cancel screen sharing.
For a while.
Okay.
Thank you. So, any other takers on Daniel's request?
All right, I'll share. Never felt that intensity, Daniel, that's for sure. But over my years as a Quaker, when I've been in meeting, I've had, I couldn't say how many, but a good number of experiences where I feel expansion. My senses expand to encompass everyone in the room. I become hyper aware of, first of all, a calmness and a quiet, but I become hyper aware of the presence of others, their scents, for instance, and it's just a wonderful, peaceful feeling. Sometimes there is light associated with it, but not always. But I can't say when, I can't guess when I'm going to enter that state, but that's what brings me back to meeting for worship, hoping to experience that set of feelings and sensations.
So Steve, how can you know that, how are you sure that there's light involved at times?
Okay. I see the word light as a metaphor. As Quakers, we believe there's that of God in each and every one of us. And when I personally think about being in the light or holding someone in the light, it's getting in touch with that internal spark of the universe rather than some external force. That's, as we know, every Quaker has their own interpretation.
Ain't it great? So, any other sharing?
Well, when I first went to work for IBM, I was wont to run 5 miles at noon, and they had a shower and a locker room in one of the buildings there on campus, and I would take a shower after running. But as a new hire, I didn't have much vacation, so that when we got to Christmas week, I had no vacation, but almost everyone else on site did have vacation, and almost the entire site was closed down. So that week when I went running at noon and got into the shower, I found that there was no hot water. And the first 2 days were very uncomfortable there. And I had never taken a cold shower before. But then I thought along about Wednesday, I figured out that if I pretended to breathe through the top of my head and down into my body, that would keep me warm while I was showering. And then shortly after that, my wife and I started studying a meditation where we did similar exercises, breathing in through the top of our head. Not unlike Daniel, I would experience different colors while doing that. And then we were later, many years later, we were thinking of getting pregnant. And we went to the Austin Science Museum to see what kind of place that would be for a child. And there was a galvanometer there, a handheld galvanometer. And so I held the galvanometer, and I think there were like there was zero current coming out of my hand. But then I tried breathing in through the top of my head and out through my hand, and the galvanometer went off the scale. It went past the max. So I thought, uh-oh, I'm not only experiencing something psychologically, but there is some physiological change going on in me while I'm doing this strange exercise. And while on the circle of light, I tried sending light metaphorically to the people being held in the light. But then one day I thought, why don't I try just breathing in through the top of my head and sending that, whatever it is, out through the palm of my hand to the person involved. And I've been doing that ever since, because I can feel the other people at the end of that, whatever it is, that extension from my hand. There's a kind of a tingling that occurs when I locate them. And then there's a difference in the quality of the energy that comes out of my palm when I'm in contact with the person being held in the light. So that's my experience.
So Larry, do you have experiences like that in worship, or just when you hold people in the light?
You're muted, Larry.
You muted yourself, Larry.
I do not try to breathe in through the top of my head and project energy out of my palm when I'm in meeting.
So do you have any sort of experience of the light when you're not trying to send light to people?
Oh yeah, as I mentioned, while in worship, I experienced a number of different colors. And actually, I'm writing a novel where I explain my entire process of worship in an appendix. So once that novel is published, you can have all the details.
Thank you, Larry. I look forward to it. Larry.
Yeah, I've come to terms with over the years with the fact that I cannot explain the experience of the light. It's completely mysterious to me. All I know is that it's there. It's there as an internal phenomenon, and the experience of the covered meeting, which I believe is a shared experience of the light, that's there. But beyond that, I can't explain it at all. Some friends think of it as an external effect, and others as an internal experience. Some people even think it's a biochemical phenomenon or something like that. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't care. I just have this great, profound experience that I'm very grateful to have. Now, philosophically, I'm kind of a panentheist. That is, I believe that we are part of God, and God is us. And there's really the experience of separation from God is an illusion. And what we're about is transcending that illusion to understand the reality that we are all one in the spirit. But you know, that's philosophical. That's not anything you can prove or even have faith about. I have faith that there is an inward experience that has been my guide and sustenance in life. And that's really all that the inner light is about for me.
Howard.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my experience, I have three, well, I'm just going to, divide it into three different kinds of experiences of the light. A lot of times they're all happening at the same time. And one, especially when we're in meeting for worship, is a sense of a thread of light coming out of everyone's head in meeting for worship. And those threads go up a ways and then start weaving together into a larger, string or cable of light. And then there are other places outside of our meeting where more threads that have been woven together come up, and they weave together into an even larger cable of light until there's this light, these cables of light or these threads of light have been woven together into this huge cable. And there is that sense of an inexplicable, mysterious experience that Terry talks about. But then on the other hand, there are some things like the idea of holding something or someone in the light is for me also a visual experience of having the concern or the person or whatever it is standing and light shining around and on that person. And then that ties back to a passage I read in George Fox's journal where he's visiting the British colonies in North America, and I believe he's in Virginia at the moment. And he's in a public meeting where he's holding forth, and he's talking about how the light is available to all of us. And someone gets up and denies that, in the language of the day, that the Indians can have this. You know, they're not. In other words, and so George Fox said, well, there was a native person there. So I asked him whether or not there was that in him that told him when he did wrong. And he said there was. And I said, see, they have the light too. So in that sense, I think if you read it just on the surface, you think, well, he's just talking about conscience or something. But I think it's deeper than that. It's a guide. That's what I got to say.
Thank you, Howard. Any other friends feel led to share?
I'll share that as a kind of a non-theist. I've always been attracted to a concept called Indra's net, which in Buddhism and Hinduism is this idea that the structure of reality is like a net, and at each crossing point in that net is a jewel, and each jewel is perfectly clear and reflects all the other jewels. So it's a little bit like a fractal-ish kind of thing. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm, and so a change in one jewel or individual, it can be reflected in other jewels and individuals. And this is a little bit like what I think Howard was saying with these kinds of threads of light connecting us all. But one additional concept that I really am attracted to from Buddhism is called metta meditation, which is the idea that there are these concentric rings, like Daniel was saying, and if we meditate on sending love and compassion, loving kindness out to those that are closest to us and those that are closest to them, and out further and further, that that we can both spread some healing in the world, as I think Larry was speaking to, but also feel a whole lot more connected to each other in ways that are intangible but still very, very real. And so when I think about the inner light, I think about it as in the quote, Dawn, that you shared. It's both inside and outside, and it's like the experience of it is a bit of a dissolving of that boundary.
So what is your experience of light in worship?
It is a sense of, which I think others have shared, this sort of sense of pervasive calmness, and the word continuity comes to mind. No longer are we kind of separated, but maybe we're all breathing at the same way at the same time. We all share one set of lungs. I'm not sure how to put it, but the architecture of the meeting house is very conducive to this kind of meditation, at least for me, because that space above us all, I feel often fills with the spirit. Whether it descends or rises from us, I'm not sure, but there are times when it's a gathered meeting and we are sheltered, but also somehow shining. I'm not sure how to put it.
Thank you.
I guess it's been really interesting for me to, sorry to jump in there, just to hear everyone speaking about this, just because I guess I tend not to have terribly much in the way of imagery, in terms of, I've these sort of beautiful images of these sort of street connections, and but that's not really too much part of my experience. I think one of the terms that keeps coming up in some of the early Quaker writings is the light, they were made tender. I experience this more as just a feeling of sort of tender openness when I feel the light, and that this is, that it just makes me very open to the world and able to feel the sort of the presence and the suffering and the love and all of the other things that of the people around me and of people elsewhere. And I feel that, yeah, it's much more of a feeling of sort of openness and tenderness rather than an image for me.
This may be a little more literal, but when I do experience the light, it's more like this sense of truth. And what I mean by that is the world that we live in, everything is designed to change reality. We wear clothes, we like live in structures, like we're always changing what's actually true. And it's that, you know, on Earth there isn't shelter and we have skin, like it's, and then we cover it up. I'm not saying like I prefer to wear clothes, that's not my point, but we're always changing things from what they actually are. And in a physical way, also in a non-physical way, we try to change people's perception of us. We want them to think of us in a certain way, whether it's at work or whether, you know, we want people to make sure that they don't think that we're a bad person or that they don't think this. And everyone's doing it all the time. They're always changing and trying to manipulate the perception of themselves and others' perception of them. And during worship, it seems like, at least for that 1 hour, no one's doing that. No one is trying to change someone's perception of them. They're trying to actually see things as they are. They're trying to see others for who they actually are. And the truth of what someone is what's in them. That's, to me, that's what the light is. And when you come at a problem or a person, or someone says, you know, this person did this horrible thing, how do you feel about that thing? And, you know, your first reaction is what society has taught you to think. But your second reaction, if you take a moment, is to think of yourself and your truth and think of what their truth is. And you look at it a little bit more objectively. And any time that you tap into that, any time that you let all of those preconceived notions about everything fall away and you look at it with kindness and openness, to me, that's experiencing the light. That's it, and it's hard, and it's practice over and over and over again to just let that be your default, because it's not my default. My default is to say, you know, like punish them or do this awful thing, or no, I want the nicer thing so that people will think that I am like a successful person. And when I strip all that away, none of that's true. Like I don't actually feel that way about any of it. And as in the way that it relates to worship, or in the hour, it's the hour that it's there, none of that's there. It's all just truth. It's all stripped away, and it's all experiencing my truth trying to connect to someone else's truth, but across all the people in the room or all the people in the meeting. And it's so blissful to know that that is truth and that it's there.
Thank you.
sometimes phrases, Quaker phrases, are really helpful. And I remember being in meeting, and there was some worry or some problems that came out in worship. And I also was working with the dilemma. And then it came to me to remember way well open. And I was able to deliver that message, but it's in our literature a lot. And it is lovely to remember.
So I guess I will use this opportunity to share. I've had very few experiences in which I either saw the light or was sure of the light. And the first one was probably the most profound. I was in a weekend workshop and we were doing internal exercise. And I was a non-believer there, although I wanted to believe. And so I kept having this, I had my eyes closed, I kept having this sense of a light above from the ceiling shining down on me. And it was very strong. And so I opened my eyes and looked up, couldn't see it. What a weird thing. And that went on and off for the entire exercise. And I didn't think much about it. But when I got home, went home that evening, I started reading the Course in Miracles. And I read it with what I would best describe as an enlightened consciousness that was new to me. So as I read the content, it had deeper meaning, and it was almost like I had been enlightened. And then I went to bed. The next morning I got up and I had a sense of joy and bliss. I simply could not wipe the smile off my face. And it was all based in my heart. And that lasted much of the day. And but it was in fact an epiphany or conversion experience in which I went from being a secular humanist or a believer wannabe to a believer in the reality of that which cannot be touched or seen or felt, but it is real nonetheless. And I have since then, I've hardly ever had that striking an experience of the light. Although there are times when I have a sense of it, and I can experience it within my heart, but that's how I experience the light. But I experience, like Larry, who sees many colors, I tend to see it as a variety of energies. Some light, some love, all of them an expression of divine. So any other sharing? So Steve, can you put the screen share back on, please? So one thing that impressed me as I was listening was how different our experiences as modern Quakers are from George Fox and the original Quakers. And one of the things that Ambler emphasizes or recommends is that we as a religion make more of an effort to appreciate the experiences and the understandings of the original friends. And he says it takes a certain amount of effort. We have to accommodate for differences in language. So for example, one of his books is called The Truth of the Heart. And what he does is take teachings from Fox's writings and puts it on the left side, and on the right side, he translates them into modern English. So the language differences aren't as much of a problem. The other thing, okay, so let's move on to the second paragraph, and then we'll take a break. Ambler invites every contemporary friends to reconnect with the clear understanding of the light discernible in the writings of early friends. He offers three general statements as a description of what the light meant to George Fox and his followers. First, the light was a capacity for awareness in every human being. So that goes back to Howard sharing about George Fox and the Native American. And it's a fundamental principle that the light is universal and that everybody has some, and that we need to look for that and respond to it. The famous Fox quote is, "Walk cheerfully on this earth, responding to that of the light of the God within whomever we meet." I have to admit, these three statements there's a lot of teachings hidden within each one, but we'll just do the best we can. The second one, the light was revealed first as self-awareness. And Ambler says this is a theme that gets pretty neglected in Quakerism. The basic idea is that going back to George Fox, he was responding to awareness and insights about himself that came to him, what he used to call great openings. And that it begins, it's like the truth of the light begins at home and then spreads out. And the last one is the light revealed the source of life and unity. And I have to be honest that I'm not quite sure what that means. At points in the pamphlet, Ambler talks about how important it is to friends to be able to experience unity as a community, unity with each other. And the point here seems to be that the light makes that possible. It's the light that brings us together. It's the light that shows us what's real and what the truth is. So anyway, any comments about Ambler's understanding of the original meaning of the light in Quakerism? And Steve, can you shift it off now? Thank you.
I think one of the things that perhaps bothers me a little bit about that, what we just read, is that it borders, I don't want to say it borders, but it feels a little bit like creed, and which is something that has really over the years attracted me to Quakerism. So, to say that there's an understanding of the light and this is how it is doesn't really work as well for me. It's perhaps more personal than that, and I suspect very individual for every person.
Well, in defense of Ambler, he emphasizes that the early Quakers shared an understanding of their own experience and the experience of others, and that it wasn't a belief about the truth or religious truth. It was an experience that could be understood, but not necessarily put into words. And he said, so it's very different than speaking philosophically or intellectually about what the light is. It's more, it's clearly experiential and indeed personal. So, any other comments?
Just that this concept that it's a capacity that exists in all of us is a real profound declaration of equality, and you know, that each of us, and that there, it's that capacity is that of God that's in each of us, and so the second one is about self-awareness, and I think that's where it gets into a completely different experience for each different separate person, who may be experiencing the inner light differently than each other, but what we recognize is the capacity in each other, if not the exact same kind of experience. I don't know.
Well, in early Quaker writing, some of the best of it is very poetic, and I think transcends that. They really didn't like to fool with the theology that much, unless they were Berkeley, and he loved to do that. But a lot of those writers said things like when it was Pennington said that prayer should be like the breathing of a child on the breast of its parent. Saying that it shouldn't really necessarily even be in words, that it's a state of spiritual being that is going on. It's a process, and he stated that in very indirect and poetic terms. And also Margaret Fell, basically said, nobody can really tell me what the light is. It's something that I know is real and I know is my salvation. But throughout early Quaker writing, there's a direct identification between the light and the nature of the Christ, of Jesus. This is something that, as someone who isn't really Christian in the Orthodox sense, I have never been able to quite get my head around. And I've often thought that it's a reflection of that being the milieu of that being sort of the only way they had to express themselves that other people in that society would understand. But it's still, this whole relationship of Jesus the Christ and the light among early friends is a little hard to follow for me.
Hambler makes the point that Berkeley, in his love of theology and in his book, The Apology, which defends Quakerism and makes it respectable and more acceptable to the larger English population, that was both a blessing and a problem. In one sense, Quakers didn't get persecuted so much because he had convinced the larger world that that Quakers were law-abiding and they were Bible-following, and they weren't unlawful. However, Ambler and others emphasize that kind of view of the light, that theological dominated, was the primary way that Quakers thought about the light for 200 years. And he thinks a lot was lost by taking that more philosophical and conceptual way of thinking about the light, because the original experience and the original inspiration did not continue within Quakerism in the way it was at the beginning.
I guess I'm noticing this running theme of, getting back to the original, what the original, friends how they experienced the light, God, whether you want to put that in theological terminology, but I kind of see, the religion in the sense that there are these dualistic kind of more orthodox, I guess, exoteric, less mystical for the general population, meanings to religion and religious thought that can get into a lot of, philosophical debate and this about this and that and the nature of things. And then, then the more esoteric or mystical or non-dual is a term that's used these days and bantered about. And when you start talking about that, the non-dual aspect, the present, what Eckhart Tolle talks about, the present, the now, or the present moment, it's something that transcends time. And that deeper unity that Shalisa was talking about, that's just being human, whether was somebody a human 400 years ago and 400, it's still something very, I don't know, there's something very, a deeper kind of sense to that, that I don't even know how to put that into words, to transcends time and space. And so, I do see there's almost a weird connection between those that came before and ourselves now in that sense.
So it's time for a little break. Let's get back together in about 10 minutes.
was nice hearing you singing.
So I guess that's enough time for a break.
I wonder if it's necessary to remind everyone that things were a lot more mysterious to the Quakers in the 17th century than they are to us. And so when they talk about the light being the source of life, well, life was a mystery to them in ways that it is not to us. So the connection they were making was a mystical one rather than a empirical one necessarily. And any empiricism was probably related to the person who experienced it, as opposed to any general observations about life.
I think that's a fair point, Larry. For the most part, when they were talking about the light within, they were talking about, in an experiential sense, what the light had shown them to be real, both within themselves and others. A lot has happened in the last 400 years, which makes it harder for us to appreciate the mysticism that was going on. And so it takes some effort to go back to the early writings and really have them make sense with.
Yeah, like psychology, for instance, they didn't have that. So.
Well, it wasn't until the novels became very popular and prominent that the anti-slavery movement really got off the ground, because it was novels that allowed people to extend themselves beyond themselves and their immediate family and their immediate community, to put themselves in the place of people they had never met in distant regions who had very different lifestyles.
So anything else before we go back to Rex Ambler?
Maybe just one final thought on the idea of sort of returning and going back to an origin. I guess I'm on the one hand, I think it's a wonderful and a greatly deepening thing that we can do to really try to be in some sort of communion with lives and minds of people who are very, very different from ourselves, and people certainly in the past and in the 1600s are definitely in that category. They're very much have a whole different experience of the world, and the effort of trying to understand them and trying to really see how they see the world is really a very spiritually deep and powerful practice, I think. On the other hand, I don't necessarily think that they're, just because they were earlier or at the time when people started using the word Quaker, means that their experiences are somehow the right ones and that ours are the wrong ones, or that any of the people in the last 300 years were the wrong ones. They're different. That's very much true. But I think that would probably maybe be, well, I don't say this with great confidence, but I think that might even be something that they would probably agree with as well. Just that the idea of like, what counts thou say, that they really were interested in having the experience of people. And so the idea that later generations would be held to the letter of their text would be probably something they would not actually approve of. And even if they didn't, I don't think we would necessarily be held to that.
Well, one of the points Ambler makes is that even though Fox used a lot of biblical language, it was available and most people understood it, and therefore he could use it to communicate what his experience was. But it's misleading to say that the early Quakers were Christian and were based their teachings and their way of living on the Bible. It was much more personal and subjective, and what they were learning about themselves through their going within and trying to get beyond thinking to a discernment of what's real and asking God's help for that. Or being open to God's help.
I'm wondering though too, I think we touched on this in the last session, the first Quaker 101 meeting, a little bit about one difference the Quakers had from some of these other splinter groups at the time, that there's this dialectic tension between this kind of radical individual approach to spirituality and religion, but also wanting to keep it within a community of people, and that the community, that the meeting is what it's also about. And for some reason, I was thinking about, the 12-step community. The first step is like you have no control over your life, and that there's some greater power beyond yourself. Whether you call that the light or God or whatever, that you have to like put aside your own ego and look toward and seek solace and seek truth and how to live your life. But then also the other part of the 12-step community is that you do this within a community of people, and the importance of that. And so that tension between those two things. Does anybody else have anything to say about that?
I just think that is a central part of the Quaker experience, is that tension that you described. Nothing more to say on that right now, but I do believe that.
Well, I think the struggle to reconcile community versus the individual is probably the story of the last 400 years, and at least within Britain and the United States. And I think before, back in those days, there was very little recognition of people as being anything other than members of the society as a whole. The agency was not, I mean, it probably was recognized in an intuitive sense, but it was not recognized very widely otherwise. And part of what the Quakers were about was recognizing, oh, yeah, even an individual can be an authority on what God is for themselves. And that was at the time, that was a revolutionary idea. I mean, I seem to recall that during the Middle Ages, it was illegal to go off and read alone. And that was the extent to which using your agency was frowned upon.
Are there stories, or are there What about experience of I guess in the larger community outside Quakerism, there are stories of groups having, you know, a kind of Pentecostal, the Holy Spirit coming down, like in the Acts or whatever, on a group of individuals, and having some kind of ecstatic experience. Is that something that others have experienced within the Quaker meetings, or where there's a sense of the whole meeting having this experience of the light, I guess, being a part of, in a group, I get in a group sense.
That reminds me of this pamphlet. I don't know if you can see this or not. The Gathered Meeting by Thomas Kelly, which I bought a copy of at Friends Meeting. The text of it is available online, but he talks about the experience of group worship, where it's a shared, I don't think he uses the word revelation, but that's sort of akin to what you're getting at, maybe, Daniel.
So the gathered meeting is the idea of everyone in the meeting joining together in common worship and common experience. There's also a covered meeting in which the presence of God comes into and infuses the meeting.
I just wanted to share something about shared experiences. My best friend is a practicing Christian, a very open-minded, wonderful, kind woman. And a while back, I would say we both together had a shared experience of the light. And in general, I experienced the light when either I'm so tired or I don't really have the capacity to think about anything other than breathing. So, you know, usually if I've been exercising or running to the point where I'm having I'm a little out of breath, and I can't think about all the things that I typically think about in general. And when all that's stripped away, you know, I experienced a little bit more. She and I were doing a heated yoga class together, and there were a lot of people in the room, and there was at the end of the class, you know, we were both so out of breath, and we were laying in Shavasana, and she just reached out and grabbed my hand because we were laying beside each other. And in that moment, there was just this overwhelming joy and bliss in connectivity with her and really with everyone in the room. And it wasn't in a religious setting, but the presence was there, the feeling was there. And I thought maybe it was just in my own head. And you know, as we were walking out, it was just silent. No one was talking, and no one was saying anything. And we went outside, and you know, she's my best friend, so I just looked at her and said, "Was that different to you?" And she said, "Yeah, that was something else." I said, "Did you feel like a light?" And she goes, "Between me and everyone." And I said, "Yeah." And it was even coming from someone who wasn't a Quaker, and you know, what Liz said, you can be a Quaker without really knowing it, or without, you know, having been there your whole life. I think the longer that I read on it, the more I realize I've probably been a Quaker for a pretty long time. I think that experience of just this shared light with humanity stripped away can be experienced in large groups, even without that intention.
Wow. When you're sharing that, I was thinking about Larry's comment about how, you know, we do live in a pretty wonderful day and age when a devout Christian can go to a yoga class and have a religious and spiritual experience like that. So
Maybe it was just, maybe we were both on the verge of a heat stroke. I don't know, but that is definitely what it felt like.
So are we ready to return to Rex? That's a cue, Steve. So the last part of the pamphlet is Hambler's prescription that we return to early Quaker understandings of the light and get what's most helpful and meaningful for modern life. So reading from the screen, a reflection on its meaning today. Besides describing the various differences between original and modern understandings of the light within, Ambler's pamphlet has a prescriptive agenda. He believes that early Quakers still have much to teach us that is important and relevant to modern life. Put simply, understanding the light clarifies our origins as Quakers. Taking the light seriously requires sitting lightly by our treasured beliefs and values and putting them to the test via experience. Ambler's experience has convinced him that Quaker practice is less about finding the answer and more about waiting patiently for the answer to be given.
I think that last sentence really resonates for me, um, that experiencing the light is almost first and foremost about finding myself and allowing myself to be in a receptive state and being receptive to what is around me, and whether that's both inside and outside, both. And so I like that last sentence where it's a matter of being open to the light. And for me, that's probably more important than even understanding the light, is to be open and receptive.
Well, I'm taking a creative writing course right now, and because of the storm, all of ACC was shut down for over a week. And we were given an assignment this week and only 4 days in which to complete it. And that was to write 2 stories, each of them in a specific setting and a specific theme. And I thought, well, I better hurry up and do this. I only have 4 days to do it. And one of them was to write about an unusual occurrence in what was otherwise a normal setting. So my immediate reaction was, oh, well, I could do an ET thing, you know, and that would be quick and I could get it done expediently and come in within the 4 days. But then I realized, you know, that's my ego trying to push it in order to meet a deadline. And so I went for a walk and just allowed my subconscious to take over. And my subconscious came up with an entirely different unexpected event. It was unexpected in all respects. And that seems to be the way things work best for me is to not use my ego to push things and be in charge, but instead to try to help the other parts of myself enact their agendas. If that seems like a more proper use of my ego, and I think that applies to my relationship to God also. My job is not to pray to God and tell God what I want and need, but instead to be open to God telling me what I need, and then using my ego as best I can to get God what to get for myself what God thinks I need. Somehow that was relevant. I'm not sure how.
It's a mystery, Larry.
This is more of a question that maybe someone can give some input on. Do you think that, does anyone think that the idea of experiencing the light and also actively practicing silence is a form of worship? And then thirdly, searching versus letting answers come, those are all connected in a way that it's a little bit difficult to kind of put this into words because it's a question, so that's I don't have the answer. By waiting for this answer, you're actively not seeking it. You're letting it come, because when you're seeking for something, you're sorting through all the things you know to be right and wrong. You're saying, okay, well, it's not this, and I have to consider this, and I don't consider this. But by being silent, both outside and inside, you're letting truth show through versus deciding what is truth. And I guess my question is, do you think that the light or experiencing the light helps you show what truth is there, what value, what items what pieces of information are actually truth and what is valuable, and that will just present itself through silence and through experiencing that light. I don't know how, there's no question mark in it, but it is a question.
If that was a yes/no question, I take the answer to be yes. And I would just add that for me, the fact that I go into a waiting state of still worship means I know there is something that needs to be, or that might be revealed, and therefore that is, I mean, paradoxically, that is of course a form of seeking. It's just that I don't know what I don't always know what I'm seeking.
I guess so.
Kind of don't think that associating light with truth is necessary. I think experience of the light is all. It's that experience, however it affects you, is what is the worship that Quakers are, that as individuals we're working towards. I don't know that truth reveals itself through the light or that truth is necessary, but the feeling and the experience that we get when we're lucky enough to be bathed in the light is the end objective of worship, at least for me.
There is an experience of the light which early friends report, which is doesn't necessarily have as much resonance with modern friends, and that is the light as something that illuminates you internally and exposes your your failings and your as a sort of a strong light of conscience. And this is the way Margaret Fell explains it. She says, whoops, I lost my little quote here. Now, friends, deal plainly with yourselves and let the eternal light search you and try you for the good of your souls. For this will deal plainly with you. It will rip you up. It will lay you open, and it will make all manifest which lodges in you. The secret subtlety of the enemy is always Satan, you know. The subtlety of the enemy of your souls, this eternal searcher and trier will make manifest. Therefore, all to this come, and by this be searched and judged and led and guided. For this you must stand or fall. So she says to be judged and led and guided. Modern Friends really emphasize the led and guided part. Judged or searched is something that, you know, early Friends emphasized a lot. The word convinced is really synonymous with the word with convicted or conviction. In some ways, they saw the experience of the light as the last judgment, that the end times were playing themselves out in the real time of 17th century England. And this was part of it, that in a way they were saying that the biblical explanations of the coming of Christ and the end times and all that were playing themselves out internally. And this was part of it. I've never quite known what to make of that, because I don't feel I've really had that experience. And I wonder if modern Friends do, and what that means one way or another.
Yeah, at one of the gatherings, someone gave a talk on this very topic, and they said that the original Friends would use the light, as you said, to illuminate their faults, but they wouldn't just illuminate their faults. They would illuminate their faults until their faults no longer had an emotional impact upon them, and until they got to a place where they could contemplate the faults without judgment or fear or any other sort of emotional attachment. And that was a step in removing those faults from themselves. And perhaps that's what you mean by the last judgment.
Well, it speaks to their concept of salvation.
Right.
You know, so the idea is that the light is like this great floodlight that illuminates you internally, both the good parts and the bad parts, and is the way that you transcend your sin and come to salvation.
I don't have a problem with that at all, and it speaks directly to me even today. And in seeing, I mean, when you said that, Terry, it was like, yeah, I totally wholeheartedly get that and agree. There's a part of me, I guess maybe because my upbringing in a fundamentalist and much more orthodox, you know, and not wanting to ever kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. But when you use the word Satan, I use Larry's word of ego, you know, that I've read, like Don, the Course in Miracles is a big, it's something that I go to and use as a practice personally. And it's, you know, I'm not going to preach on why it's, you know, a great, it's either something that resonates with you or it doesn't, but it's something that does resonate with me. And it's weird. A Course in Miracles uses this very ancient, very biblical language, but then it also uses a lot of a lot of modern, you know, terminology and use of, psychological words and in place of things like, rather than saying Satan, the ego. And I think that's a great thing. I think it's, and I seeing this metaphorically and as an inner experience makes total sense to me. I get it.
But before we lose sight of it, it's always important to understand that for early friends, all this ends with redemption and joy. And that's all through the writings. You may have this experience of judgment, which is frightening and soul-rending, but it all ends in joy.
Terry, what you read also kind of resonated with me, and I spoke back to my husband and said 100%, like feeling illuminated from the inside out, but it feels like not every wrong decision, but everything that I could, for lack of a term, improve about myself or do better by the rest of the world, or take this time to be kinder, or all those show up as like these little dark spots that want to be taken over by the light. Like the light wants to just get rid of them. And for the longest time, I was overwhelmed by all those dark spots constantly. Just constantly, I felt like every decision I made, I'm a very impulsive person and don't have much self-control in general. And so I would say something to someone, and then 5 minutes later, once I left, I think, man, I shouldn't have said it like that. I should have been kinder when I said that, or I should have done this, or I should have done that. And what this illuminating feeling helps me, the ending result of it, how it ends in joy, is that I kind of asking myself two questions. Is it true? And is it useful? And it just gives me this light where if it's true, then is it useful? If it's true but not useful, if this thought is you should have been kinder, well, that's a useful thought, and that what are ways I can be kinder? And if it isn't true, then I'm able to let the light just wash it away, and that's okay. And it took me so long to find that and experience that and feel that it just changed my perception on interacting with people at all. Not everything everyone says is a criticism. I know that's not necessarily just like the light, but in relation to what you read about, the light bringing forth all the things that are wrong, it did in a wonderful way,
It's actually just touching on something you were asking about earlier, Shalisa, the question of sort of truth and the relationship between truth and the light. That's something I think about a lot as well. I was a philosophy major in college, and my mind is also very strongly drawn to argument and to sort of more structured, sort of rational forms of trying to seek the truth, and trying to just be as rigorous and detailed about that as possible, which is a very, very different form of truth seeking, I feel like, than what we do often in Quaker meeting. I've sort of struggled with how to reconcile those two tendencies, that I do tend to want to scrutinize things and to bring them into the light of reason, which I think is not a bad thing. I think that is a very legitimate and other form of light that we have access to as humans. However, I find that I can see, or at least I think, I feel different sorts of truth, or different sorts of an openness to the realities of the world when I let myself be more open to, like I do sometimes when I'm more successful in silent worship. I feel like I can hear things that are just I would otherwise maybe push out or exclude, or wouldn't take the time to really allow to sort of settle into myself. I really value both of those things, and I think they're things as Quakers that we can really use.
I think what you just said in relationship, I mean, maybe there is a little bit of Socratic dialogue in Quaker worship and meeting. And so that element, that philosophical element, as long as it's done in that kind of inquisitive and creative and questioning manner, where a Socratic type of dialogue is in play, makes total sense and meshes well with what goes on at a Quaker meeting. And maybe there's a Venn diagram there of a little bit of overlap.
I wanted to raise a question related to early friends. We've talked a little bit about judgment, but I think also the concept of forgiveness is important. And this idea that the inner light is revealing the darkness as well as, you know, the work of the enemy. I wonder, you know, I'm dipping into Emmett Fox, and I really like his metaphorical perspective on some of things related to the Lord's Prayer. And one thing which really resonated with me that I read recently was that, you know, we ask to be forgiven. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who trespass against us, which is a suggestion that is very kind of, I think, comparable with metta meditation, that the divine that we are seeking is only something that we can give. And so it's the forgiveness that we extend to others that is what we seek from Christ. And we've got the capacity to forgive ourselves, to forgive each other, and to engage in a communion around, you know, vanquishing the enemy. But I wonder about the relationship between judgment and forgiveness and the light, and how that related to the early friends related to the concept of forgiveness.
Yeah, there's a cool feedback loop in what you were talking about. How what you extend, you get back in return. So I think there's I don't remember the saying, you know, as above is so below. And so there's that aspect. But what Terry said earlier about the whole judgment thing, it sheds light on a different approach to judgment. It's a whole different, it's not this condemnation. It's a more of that forgiving, of letting go of these things, but you can't let them go until you sit with them, until you're with it, until you embrace the suck, so to speak. So it's kind of a weird paradox. And Larry touched on it too, about how you have to be with these things, you know, the darkness. You have to look at it. And I've used the analogy in my personal life of it's kind of like compost. You know, you put all that shit that comes up in your life, all that crap, and you put it in and you let it sit and stew and ferment, and then you go and you dig in that every once in a while, and you dig around in it, and then you let it sit some more, and you look at it, and then over time, all of that turns into great fertilizer for growing some flowers.
Well, the important thing, though, is even though the light may illuminate all these failings and terrible things, the point in the end is to have faith that the light itself will heal you, that it's not your strivings or intellectualizing or any of this stuff. It's releasing yourself to the light that brings you up out of this darkness. And I mean, James Naylor says, art thou in the darkness? Mind it not, for if thou dost, it will feed thee more. But stand still and act not. Wait in patience till the light arises out of the darkness and leads thee.
So don't just do something, sit there. So I and I would add that the light not only heals the faults, but it also heals the shame and guilt that surrounds the faults. The two dissolve together. And I have to go to my next meeting.
Well, thank you for being here, Larry.
Bye.
Yes, and I'll need to run too. We've got a 3 o'clock meeting I need to run to. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, Chip.
I wonder what you guys think of. I was just reading a book by Rufus Jones, sort of a really very thoughtful Quaker thinker and writer and historian and sort of philosopher in the 20th century. I guess he was, it's sort of in a various series of essays, an extended sort of argument against that sort of the very sort of kind of quietist idea of very intense, just not doing anything until one is moved by the light. I think his thought was that Quakerism after the initial period went into a long period of quietism in which Quakers were so determined to allow themselves only to be moved by spiritual light from outside of themselves that they just kind of stopped doing anything or stopped doing things enough and stopped seeking and thinking and really participating in culture and in the world, and that this was actually a great missed opportunity to bring Quaker witness into the world, and that instead we should have that openness, but at the same time also that the sort of active components of ourselves, of our reason, of our searching, of our seeking and questioning, these things are just as much a part of God's reality and part of ourselves and part of the light as the sort of purely passive side. And that if we sort of see them as utterly separate, then we are misleading ourselves.
Yeah. That dialectic tension there again is a tough one for me personally, and I just think people in general, I don't know. That's one of the reasons I left the Unitarian Universalist Church and came over to the Quakers, because it got so political sometimes, and so there was so much, almost a sense of fighting what you're against instead of fighting for what you're for, so to speak, and yeah, having that kind of calm center and coming from that place and then going out into the world, leaving Plato's cave, but then coming back to Plato's cave, but in a non-violent way, saying, here's the truth that I've found. And you're not necessarily beating people over the head with a Bible or, your approach to truth. So how to find that, it's a tough road to hoe sometimes.
I just like to share one quick thing here, and that is when I first attended Quaker meeting in Swarthmore, there were, I don't know, somewhere between 4 and 6 people who I immediately recognized as weighty Quakers. There was something about them, their essence, their physical presence radiated a sense of calm in action. Anything I ever had to do with them was a blessing. This is what we're striving for, if we're striving. We're hoping that the light can infuse our personality and our being to the point where we don't even have to think about, oh, what's the right way to do this? We become that type of person. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to worry about it. I mean, these people, it was just the most amazing thing to be in the presence of this group of folks for a number of years.
I love that. That description is beautiful. On the other hand, I really do think we should never stop thinking about what we're doing. We always, we need to know and we need to understand, and we can always be wrong. That's no matter how deeply spiritually we believe ourselves to be. I think I'm probably wrong about a lot of things, so maybe even right now, but I really, yeah, I think abandoning questioning should never be one of our ends.
Well, I think that's what we call discernment, you know, in a Quaker context.
And that discernment is done by the group, by the community, not by the individual. And that is extremely important. And, you know, Daniel, it seems to me that your dilemma over your bike is not too petty to want to draw a community of people who know something about that together to help you. You know, this is Liz. And I don't
yeah,
know
I still can't see her. I was trying. Plus, you think it was the spirit talking.
I think that's one of the most important things for me. It's not just the light that I can bring to something, but the light that the community can bring to something if I ask, and I'm not afraid to ask, because I find that when I ask, I have the access to everyone's light, not just my own. And
thank you for.
Yeah, it helps. Yeah. It helps the other person too. It's my experience that being on clearness committees about things, even trivial things, helps me in my experience of coming to that unity and light, discernment, the whole discernment piece.
I kind of came up with.
Daniel wanted to say something, I think.
I just wanted to say thank you for that, and thank you to James for sharing, because that, yeah, we can be wrong, and we can get into what's called spiritual materialistic kind of thinking, or almost kind of bringing ego into our spiritual thinking, and kind of a spiritual narcissistic way of approaching things if we're not careful. And so having the community there, and I'm curious, as I'm kind of new to a lot of these things and these processes and this language, to dive in more and get more involved in these, you know, try a clearness committee. One of the things that COVID has done, I think in my own personal life, but I think all of us, is made us so insulated now. And I'm feeling the need and desire, and I'm such an intimate person. I love hugs and I love being connected with people, and I'm just need and want that in my life, and I haven't had it. And I'm, you know, it's just like, I need this, what we're doing right here, right now with one another. And whether it's a 12-step community, or if it's, you know, that connection is important. You know, and so, yeah, it's,
So James, are we at the time of ending?
I think it might be the time of ending. Yes. Thank you, Don, so much for leading this session of Quakerism 101. And thank you, everyone. I guess I'll go ahead and stop the recording now.